Hello everyone, and welcome to another Monster Hunter World weapon review. Today we're going to be working with my very first hammer. Now what I've been doing is I've been playing a whole bunch with the Diablos Shatterer 2 because I want to get good at the hammers, right? So what I've done is I've got heavy bow guns, I've got light bow guns, I've got lances a little bit, and then I've got the hunting horns, right? And the hammers. That's kind of like my weapon progression, if you want to call that. And as of this video, the behemoth hasn't come out, so we don't know what kind of new weapons we're getting with the behemoth. If we're getting, I'm hoping we're getting a whole slew of new weapons, right? And so we won't know if there will be a new meta hammer, but if we aren't getting a new meta hammer, a lot of people consider the Diablos Shatterer 2 the best hammer in the game. So I thought, well, geez, I might as well start here, right? You know, kind of find out what the hammers have best to offer, and we'll go ahead and do a full breakdown of the weapon and kind of explain why it's so strong. Okay, so jumping into the base stats of the Diablos Shatterer 2, we can see it has a very large attack value of 1,196. The only other hammer that really shares that very high attack damage is the Devil Joe hammer. Now, of course, it's always a little more complicated than that. We have to look at all the attributes of the weapon, so let's go ahead and move on. The next thing we notice is Diablos Shatterer 2 accesses a white sharpness bar. That's as good as it can be, right? After that, we see it has negative 25% affinity. That's a downside. And then after that, we can see that this is an elementalist weapon. So you can actually boost the attack of the Diablos Shatterer 2 even higher. And this is really meaningful because this is kind of how it cuts away from the other hammers, right? If you were going to compare this to another hammer, I would probably compare it to the Devil Joe hammer, right? In terms of attack, they're right there at the same point. But Diablos Shatterer 2 is going to jump ahead by a pretty fair margin once you've added the elementalist decoration onto the build, right? And the Devil Joe hammer, you can make some arguments for it. You could say, well, the white sharpness bar is larger. Maybe you can apply Dragon Seal, something like that. Or you do a little bit of dragon damage. It's really not that much. When you're dealing with hammers, they're not going to deal a ton of elemental damage. You're mostly worried about their raw damage, right? So Diablos Shatterer 2, just having that higher raw, it's a great big advantage. It also has a little more, well, let me rephrase that. It has negative affinity of 25%, which is better than Devil Joe's negative affinity of 30%, see? And then, so that's pretty meaningful. It also has that level 2 decoration slot, which is another way that it's kind of standing out from the Devil Joe hammer, right? And then after that, they tie on the augmentation. Speaking of which, if you're not sure what to do with the augmentations, I definitely recommend taking at least one of them to be health recovery, right? Like if you're a speedrunner, you can do probably one attack, one affinity, and that's if you know you're going to play like perfect. But if you're just playing casually like I do, I play casually, health regen is so useful on the hammers because more likely than not, you're going to get clipped by the monster. Hammers are such a short range weapon. You really get in there, and then your odds of getting clipped by the monster just go up by a lot at that point. And the other augmentation, if you're going to do health regen, the other one should definitely be affinity, because you want to get Diablos Shatterer's affinity down or up, however you want to phrase it, right? You want to fix its negative affinity so that when you're getting your crit attacks in, right, you're more likely to get those crit attacks, and that's going to raise your overall DPS, right? It's going to justify taking something like crit boost 3. So we're really interested in having higher affinity here. Okay, now that we're done taking a look at the base stats of the Diablos Shatterer, we're ready to move on to talking about the build. And that's because when we're talking about like a pure melee weapon, like a hammer, there's really nothing else to look at other than, other than its base stats. And then you build for that, right? Let's talk about the cosplay build that you see at the beginning of the video, right? When you wear the full set of Diablos armor, you get the non-elemental boost. That's really important. You're getting a nice little damage boost from wearing 4 pieces of the Diablos armor set. And by the way, that's interchangeable with the Black Diablo set as well. And the 2 levels gives you Bludgeoner. Basically, the way it works is your sharpness bar has a damage multiplier, right? and when you drop into a lower level, you get a smaller multiplier. Well, what Bludgeoner does is it kind of reduces how much damage you're going to lose, so it's not going to be as bad. The wording of the skill is not that good. It makes it sound like the weapon's going to get stronger as it loses sharpness. It's more like the weapon just doesn't get as weak as it would have gotten. So that's how Bludgeoner works. And then, yeah, after that, you can see these skills aren't that bad. Heroics 4. That's I don't like Heroics, personally. I've seen people do speedruns with Heroics, and it's really impressive. Like, they'll drink to recover if they took damage, and then they'll roll to stop drinking so that they don't pass that health threshold. It's really impressive, right? But I don't play with Heroics, and I don't think the average player ever will. Maybe if they changed Guts so that it had a smaller threshold or something like that, I don't know. But yeah, I don't ever use Heroics. I guess it could be okay. More likely than not, if I take enough damage, I'm just going to heal. Tremor resistance, that's fine. You know, it's going to help you against somebody annoying like Devil Joe. There's a whole bunch of monsters that cause a little bit of tremoring, so yeah, it's kind of a luxury skill in my opinion, right? Some skills you really don't need, but it makes the game a little easier. Crit Draw 3. So basically the way Crit Draw works is every time you put your hammer away, right, you sheath it, and you bring it back out, your next move is going to have 100% affinity. So Crit Draw 3 is not that bad on a hammer, because hammers can be sheathed pretty quickly. Slugger 3 is going to give you extra KO when you're hitting the monster in the head. Marathon Runner 2 is going to make it so that you run out of stamina slower while you're charging your moves. And Slider is going to give me a nice little boost to affinity. I mean, it's the most I could do with the free level 2 decoration slot. I could have gone with like Tenderizer, but I figure affinity so that if I'm going downhill, I get that nice little boost, right? So yeah, that's what we got going on. It's really not that bad. The Diablos armor set is pretty decent against monsters that deal fire damage, and there's a lot of them. And then the fact that it has Crit Draw and Slugger really isn't that bad for a hammer either. So yeah, it's one of those cases where the build looks fun, and it actually kind of plays pretty decently as well. Next up, we have the low decoration build. This is for people who don't really have a lot of decorations, but you know what? If you've got the time and you've got the patience, you can go farm up all the materials you need to put together this armor set. So what we have here at the top, you can see I took Handicraft to 5 for that nice white sharpness bar, and I was able to do that by combining the Handicraft Charm 3 and the Death Stench Heal Beta, right? Next, you can see I have 3 levels of Weakness Exploit. I'm getting that from Dragon King Eye Patch Alpha, as well as Kaiser Coil Alpha. And Kaiser Coil Alpha is why we have 2 levels of Blast on the build as well. But yeah, that's how we're finishing Weakness Exploit. We could have finished the Weakness Exploit skill using the Vambraces, but actually I've decided to go with the Lava Seath Vambraces because that gives me Affinity Sliding, and I really wanted Affinity Sliding, right? Other than that, you know that Kulve Taroth's Ire Alpha gives me 2 levels of Crit Boost. And you can see I've added 1 decoration, the Flight Jewel 2. This is a Rarity 5 decoration, which means it's one of the most common decorations you can unlock. And it gives you the Airborne skill, and I figure that pairs pretty well with Affinity Sliding. So Weakness Exploit and Affinity Sliding, they're giving me some positive affinity. We got Crit Boost 2 boosting my damage, and we got Airborne for, if you want to jump in the air and do a bunch of damage that way. We got Handicraft giving us the white sharpness bar. I think overall it's a really decent build for somebody who doesn't really have any decorations. This is pretty good. And now we move on to the all decorations build. So I'm still kind of new to hammers. I would love to get feedback from you guys if you think this is as optimized of a build as I could have put together. You can see I brought Crit Eye to level 6. I have 3 levels of Weakness Exploit, and I have Affinity Sliding. You can see I'm really trying to get my affinity up so that the critical boost level 2 matters. I could have given up Affinity Sliding to have crit boost level 3. I could have given up Protective Polish to have crit boost level 3, but I just felt like, especially for the hammer, those skills are too important. I don't know, maybe I could be convinced to drop the Affinity Sliding. It just depends. I mean, you get a really decent boost of affinity when that skill kicks in, and when you're charging your attacks with the hammer, it's so easy to get it to kick in. When you're going, you barely need any kind of ramp will do. Of course, non-elemental boost, that's pretty non-negotiable. Handicraft, of course, as well, is pretty non-negotiable. Now, Protective Polish, that's so that I can get the, once the white sharpness bar dies, I will use a Webfish scale to quickly resharpen my weapon, and then I'll be able to have that white sharpness bar for a lot longer, right? And that just made sense to me. So yeah, that's the build. Whatever other skills you see, those were just side effects of the armor pieces that I've chosen. The main ones were Crit Eye, Handicraft, Weakness Exploit, Crit Boost 2, right? Affinity Sliding, Protective Polish, and Non-Elemental Boost. Yeah, if you can tell me how to get this more optimized, I'm all ears. And probably because this is such a powerful weapon, In the future, it's very likely I'm going to give it an updated build if I feel it's necessary. I mean, we're probably going to get new behemoth armor, for example, right? And this is the first time that I'm using a hammer in my videos, so I figure I should probably, well, maybe I'll give you guys some tips on using the hammers. You know, I can tell you as somebody who just recently had to learn how to use them. They do feel odd, especially the short range is a big deal. Having to get really, really close to the monster is something you have to practice. Learning the range of the weapon. It can actually feel a little bit underwhelming until you've practiced with the weapon a lot. But at some point, once you really get comfortable with the timing of the slow attacks and you get comfortable with the very short range of the weapon, you learn it's pretty strong. This is a redeeming weapon because once it hits the monster hard enough, it'll cause a flinch, it'll cause the monster to get knocked over, it'll cause a KO on the monster, and you'll get these long combinations that just deal tremendous amount of damage. So it's a very fun weapon. I really love the style of the weapon. You know, I'm not a big fan of the switch axe or the charge blade. I don't like those weapons that are, they do all the like, you know, fancy moving around. I like the, maybe it's the situation where I get so used to playing with something very technical like the bow guns or maybe the hunting horns. I love having a weapon like the great swords and the hammers where you just kind of come in and the goal is a little simpler. You just want to come in and beat the monster up, you know? You know what I mean? And it's not so complicated at all when you're, and that's not to say it doesn't take skill. It actually takes a tremendous amount of skill. But what you're thinking about in your mind is a lot more simplified. You're allowed to focus more in on just one goal, you know what I mean? You're not trying to juggle anything in your mind. Like when you're playing with the hunting horn, you're juggling some ideas, you know, you're juggling, is it an opportune moment to use a performance? Should I be stocking a new melody? Should I be recasting a buff for my team so it doesn't run out? You think about those things when you're playing with the hunting horn. When you switch over to playing with a hammer, all you really care about is getting as close as you can to the monster's head and beating them up, and it's kind of refreshing, especially if you're used to playing with all those weapons too much, the other ones, hunting horns, heavy bow guns, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun with it. I think the next weapon class I'm really interested may be the gun lances, so I have to get a little more comfortable with those, and in the meantime I'm probably going to wrap up the light bow guns and I'm probably going to really flesh out the hammers. I'd also like to take this moment to announce that I have some terrific guys helping me at this point. They want to help me make some content. They're really skilled speedrunners, and so you guys will see an upcoming change to, well, you'll see a new video format coming out soon, and it's all experimental. I've never done anything like this before, but you're going to be getting some great information from some experienced speedrunners on their understanding of the game as well, so that I'm not working on all this alone. There's so much in the game to cover that I really just don't have time to cover it, and they've graciously offered to help. Okay, so more on that later. I'm sure you guys will see that in the near future, and that's everything I have to say. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.